Take her, then, and let the debt be settled between us." The words came out of the small woman standing in the middle of his ruined hall as though she were bartering a horse, and Radcliffe, Duke of Halloran, did not at first understand that the girl beside her was the price. Rain hammered the shuttered windows of Halloran, water finding the same cracks it had found for 6 years, and the two figures who had forced their way past his steward stood dripping upon the stone, one of them clutching a document with a broken seal, the other looking at the floor as if she wished it might open and swallow her. He had not received a caller in longer than he could easily count. He received no one. That was the whole architecture of his life, built stone by deliberate stone since the night the fire had taken half his face and the whole of his happiness, and here now was a stranger in a wine-coloured travelling cloak, speaking his name aloud in his own hall as though she had every right to it. "Madam," he said, and watched her flinch at the sound. His voice did that to people. He had grown accustomed to the flinch. He had, in truth, learned to use it. "You will tell me who you are before you tell me anything else, and you will tell me quickly, for my patience is a smaller estate than my house's." "Lady Ellingham," she said, recovering, lifting her chin in the manner of a woman who had spent years persuading herself that she was owed things. "Widow of Sir Bartram Ellingham of Fen Marsh. Your Grace will recall that my late husband held certain notes of your father's, a matter of £6,000, with interest these 11 years unpaid." Radcliffe recalled nothing of the sort. His father had died leaving debts scattered across 3 counties like seed flung by a careless hand, and Radcliffe had spent the first bitter years of his dukedom paying them, chasing them, disputing the false ones and honouring the true. He had thought them long since done. But he saw the paper trembling in her grip, and he saw that she believed it, and belief, he had learned, was a currency of its own. "And you have come," he said slowly, "through a storm to a house every soul in the North Country warns its children against, to collect £6,000. In coin, I take it, from a man who does not open his door. Not in coin, your Grace." Here she smiled, and it was the smile that told him everything, a smile with a plan folded up small inside it. She reached back without looking and drew the second figure forward by the wrist, hauling her into the grey light of the failing afternoon. "In kind. My husband's note may be forgiven entire. I will burn it before your eyes, in exchange for a wife. A young woman gently reared of good character, to keep your house and give your grace and hair. You have need of one. All the world knows the Halloran line ends with you." For a long moment Radcliffe said nothing at all. The fire behind him spat and settled. He was aware, as he always was, of the ruins of his face turned half toward the light, the puckered map of old burning that ran from his temple to his jaw, and he was aware that the girl had not yet looked at it, because she had not yet looked at him. She was young. 22, perhaps, no more. Her cloak was thin and much mended, a servant's cloak worn by someone who was not quite a servant, and the water had plastered a strand of brown hair to her cheek. She held herself very straight. That was the thing he noticed. Past the meanness of the cloak and the pallor of her face, she held herself as though her spine belonged to a woman of far better fortune than her garments claimed, and she was holding, he saw with white knuckles, a small carpet bag that could not have contained more than the sum of everything she owned. "You offer me a person," he said at last, "to cancel a sum of money." "I offer your Grace a bargain," Lady Ellingham corrected, and something in the swiftness of it, the readiness, made his old cold anger stir. A generous one. Where else would such a girl find a match? Look at her. Portionless, motherless, her father these 2 years in his grave and his affairs a wreck. She is my stepdaughter, your Grace, and I have kept her out of Christian duty long past the point of sense. But I have a daughter of my own blood, Honoria, a girl of true refinement, an ornament to any household, and I will not see Honoria's prospects starve to feed a stranger's child. There. I speak plainly, for I think your Grace prefers it. So that was the shape of it. Radcliffe understood the shape of it perfectly, having been born into a world that ran on precisely such arithmetic. The widow had 2 girls beneath her roof and the means to keep one. She had chosen. And she had ridden through a storm to a monster's door, because a monster was exactly what a woman disposes of an inconvenient stepdaughter upon, a man so frightful that no gentler match would ever be sought. A man so hidden away that whatever became of the girl behind his walls need trouble no one's conscience in the drawing rooms of Fen Marsh. He should have thrown them both out into the rain. He very nearly did. The words were in his mouth. "The door, madam, is behind you, and I trust you know the way to it, for you found it readily enough." When the girl spoke for the first time, "I would rather you did not speak of me as though I were a chair to be given away," she said. Her voice was low and quite steady, and she had said it not to him but to her stepmother, and Lady Ellingham's face went sharp and white. Radcliffe went very still. "Dulcie," the widow hissed. "I only mean," the girl went on, and now at last she turned her head and looked directly at him, "that his Grace is a man and not a debtor's ledger, and it seems to me discourteous to arrange the whole of his life across his own hall floor without once inquiring what he might wish." "I beg your pardon, your Grace." She dipped a small, correct curtsy. "You did not ask for us. That much I know." He waited for it, the flinch, the involuntary widening of the eyes, the pity that was worse than the flinch, the quick glance away that people gave the ruin of his face before pretending they had not looked. He had catalogued every variety of it over 6 years. He knew them the way a physician knows fevers. None came. She looked at his face, all of it, the whole ruined half and the whole unruined half, and she did not blink, and she did not soften into that sickly gentleness that meant a person had decided to be brave about him. She simply looked, and having looked, went on regarding him as one regards another human creature, waiting to hear what he would say. It disarmed him so thoroughly that for a moment he forgot to be cruel. "You are Dulcie," he said. "Dulcie Fosgrove, your Grace. My father was Mr. Edmund Fosgrove of Larkmere, before it was sold." A small pause, and then, with a plainness that matched his own, "There is no debt owed you on my account. I want that understood before anything else is said. Whatever passed between your Grace's father and Sir Bartram is nothing to do with me, and I will not have you think I have come here to be paid off, for I have not. I did not know where we were going until we were upon the road. Dulcie," the widow's voice climbed, "you will hold your tongue." "You will. I will not be sold, madam, and pretend I chose it." She did not raise her voice at all. That was the strange power of it. "If his Grace turns us out, I shall walk back to the village and take a place scrubbing floors, and I shall be happier scrubbing floors that are honestly mine to scrub than mistress of any house I was traded into like a sack of meal. I say it so that everyone here knows exactly where I stand, and no one may claim later that I schemed for it." Radcliffe, Duke of Halleraux, who had not laughed since before the fire, felt something move in his chest that was perilously close to it. He suppressed it at once. He had learned to suppress a great many things. "You are singularly ill-suited to being bartered," he observed. "So my stepmother has often complained, your Grace." Lady Ellingham had gone from white to a mottled red. "Your Grace must forgive her. She is wilful, and grief has made her strange. But she is a good worker and healthy, and her blood is respectable. The Fosgroves are an old name, if a poor one, and I assure you that once the thing is done, and she is settled, she will give no trouble. A husband's authority soon mends a wilful temper." She let go the paper long enough to press her hands together. £6,000, your Grace, forgiven entire. You need only say the word and sign, and she is yours, and I shall trouble your peace no more." And there it was, laid out plainly upon the stone floor of his hall. The whole cold machinery of it. He had only to say a word. A word would settle a debt he was not even certain he owed, would rid him of these 2 dripping strangers, would restore the silence he had spent 6 years perfecting. And it would take a girl who wanted no part of any of it, and shut her up inside these walls with him, with the shuttered rooms and the covered mirrors, and the servants who had learned not to meet his eye. He looked at Dulcie Fosgrove. She was watching him with those level eyes, and he understood, with a clarity that startled him, that she expected him to be cruel, not because he was disfigured, because he was a man with power over her, standing in a warm hall while she stood cold in a mended cloak, and every man with power over her had thus far spent it upon his own comfort. She expected nothing better of him. She had braced herself to bear it. That, more than anything, was what undid the word he had meant to say. "No," he said. Both women looked at him. "I will not sign your paper, madam." He turned from them and walked toward the fire, giving them, deliberately, the ruined side of his face, for it was a thing he did when he wished to be rid of company. Most people could not bear it long. I do not buy wives. Nor do I take payment in living persons. If your husband held a true note against my father's estate, present it to my man of business at York, and he will examine it honestly. And if it is genuine, you shall have your money in coin, as debts are properly discharged among Christian people. But you will not settle it in flesh at my hearth, and you will not leave that girl here as a reckoning. Take her home. He heard behind him a small sound from the widow, a sound of a plan collapsing. Your Grace does not understand, she said, and desperation had crept into her smoothness now, thinning it. I cannot take her home. There is no place for her. I have Honoria to think of her season, her prospects. I have stretched every shilling. I cannot feed 2 grown girls on a widow's portion and dress one of them for company besides. It is not to be done. And this one, the paper stabbed toward Dulcie, this one drives off every respectable notion I have ever proposed for her, refuses every situation I find, shames me before my friends with her opinions. She is 21 and unmarriageable, and I am done. If your Grace will not take her, I shall leave her at the parish gate. I swear before God I shall, for I will not carry her back to spoil Honoria's chances 1 hour longer. The hall was very quiet. Rain and fire. Radcliffe turned back around. Dulcie had not moved. But something had happened in her face, not tears. She was too proud for tears in front of them, but a kind of stillness that was worse than weeping, the stillness of a person hearing at last, spoken aloud in a stranger's hall, the thing she had always known and never made anyone say. She had known she was unwanted. She had not, perhaps, known she was unwanted quite so completely as to be abandoned at a parish gate in a storm to be free of her. He watched her absorb it. He watched her decide not to let it show, and mostly succeed, and he found that the small failure of that mostly, the single hard swallow, the flicker of her lashes downward and up again, struck him harder than any grand collapse would have. He knew that flicker. He had performed it himself, in the years when he had still cared what men said of him, before he had shut the doors and stopped caring within the reach of anyone's eyes. "Madam," he said, and his voice had changed. Even he could hear that it had changed. "You will not leave her at any gate. You will not need to. Then your Grace consents. I consent to nothing you have proposed." He came a few steps nearer, and the widow retreated an equal distance, and he noted it and did not care. "I will not buy your stepdaughter, but I have need, as it happens, of a housekeeper. My last left me at Michaelmas, and I have not troubled to replace her, my household being small and my guests fewer. If Miss Fosgrove wishes it, if she wishes it, madam, and speaks the wish herself, she may take that place at proper wages, under proper articles, free to give her notice and go the day she chooses, as any servant is free. That is not a sale. That is employment. It is the only arrangement I will make, and I will make it with her and not with you." Lady Ellingham's mouth opened and closed. Housekeeper. A stepdaughter of the old Fosgrove name, reduced to service. It was, he could see her calculating, a scandal of a kind, but a smaller and cheaper scandal than a girl at a parish gate, and it cost her nothing, and it removed the girl be a horizon of Honoria's season just as thoroughly as any marriage would. She recovered her composure with a speed he found faintly obscene. She said, "Well, if your Grace thinks it suitable, I am sure I have no objection, though what her poor father would say." "Her poor father is not here to say anything," Ratcliffe said, "which is precisely how you came to be able to do this. I did not ask your objection. I asked hers." He looked past the widow entirely to the girl in the mended cloak. "Miss Fosgrove, you have heard the terms, such as they are. This is not a kind house. I keep it dark and I keep it quiet, and I am not, whatever wages I pay, a comfortable master. You would do better at those honest floors you spoke of, but the floors here are honest too, and the wages real, and the door, I give you my word upon it, opens outward as easily as in. Whenever you should wish to walk through it, decide for yourself. No one in this hall will decide it for you again." He had not meant to say the last of it. It had come out of some place he kept shut. "The door opens outward whenever you should wish." He had built the whole of Hallorow into a door that opened only inward, a house one entered and did not leave, himself the prisoner of it as much as its master, and he did not know why, for a stranger dripping on his floor, he had suddenly promised the opposite. Dulcie Fosgrove looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked at her stepmother, and at the broken sealed paper still clutched in that ringed hand, and at the rain sheeting down the black windows, and last of all she looked around the great dim hall, the shrouded chandelier, the cold length of it, the single fire, as though taking honest measure of the life she was being offered, refusing to pretend it was other than it was. "I should want it in writing, your grace," she said, "the wages, and the term, and the leaving. My father taught me that a bargain unwritten is a bargain half meant, and I have lately had reason to think him right." Behind her, Lady Ellingham made a scandalized sound. Radcliffe, Duke of Helero, who men called the beast of the North Country and worse, inclined his ruined head to the portionless girl in the servant's cloak, and felt the corner of his scarred mouth pull, against his every intention, toward the first true smile it had attempted in 6 years. "In writing," he agreed, "by morning. You may read it before you sign, and strike out any clause that displeases you." He turned to his hovering steward, frozen these many minutes in the doorway. "Grissom. A room for Miss Fosgrove, the blue chamber, it is dry, and a fire in it, and something hot brought up. And show Lady Ellingham to her carriage. Her business here is concluded. I have not yet said whether I stay," Dulcie said. He paused, met her eyes again. And there passed between them in that cold hall something he had no name for and no wish to examine, a flint strike of understanding, quick and bright and gone. "No," he conceded. "You have not, then say it, Miss Fosgrove, one way or the other, and let it be your word and no one else's. Do you stay?" The rain waited, the fire waited, the widow, for once in her voluble life, waited. "I stay," said Dulcie Fosgrove, "until I choose not to." "Until you choose not to," Radcliffe repeated, and something in him that had been shut and barred a very long time shifted, without his leave, upon its hinges. The carriage came up the long avenue of dead limes an hour after the light had begun to fail, and Radcliffe, Duke of Helero, watched it from the shadow of the west stair as though it carried some verdict he had long expected and long dreaded. He had not asked for a bride. He had asked for nothing from the world in 6 years but that it leave him to his silence, and the world had answered by sending him a girl in a borrowed cloak, and a stepmother who could not keep the triumph out of her voice. He did not go down at once. That was his habit now, to stand where he could see and not be seen, to take the measure of a thing before it took the measure of him. The great door groaned open below, and Mrs. Alder, who had kept his house since before the grief, went out onto the steps with a lamp. Radcliffe stayed above, one shoulder against the cold stone, and let the arriving party arrange itself in the pool of yellow light. The stepmother descended first, and he knew her kind before she had spoken 3 words. Lady Ellingham came down from the carriage as though she were the one bestowing a favour, her gloved hand fluttering at her throat, her eyes going swiftly up the dark face of the house and swiftly away from it, the way eyes went from him. Behind her a younger woman lingered in the carriage door, and this, he understood, was the daughter the whole bargain had been built to spare, Honoria Ellingham. She was pretty in the manner that pleased ballrooms, pink and gold and startled, and she was weeping without troubling to hide it, and every glance she cast at the house was a glance of horror plainly given. "Come, Dulcie," Lady Ellingham said, not turning, and there was iron under the sweetness of it. "Do not keep his Grace's people standing in the cold. You of all people ought to know your place enough for that." And then the last of them stepped down. Radcliffe did not, at first, understand what he was looking at. He had expected another Honoria, a pale duplicate got up for sacrifice, some trembling creature who would faint on his floor and hate him from the day she arrived. Instead, a young woman set her worn boot to the step and came down with her hand offered to her, and without seeming to want one. She was plainly dressed, more plainly than the maid who had ridden with the luggage, in a grey that had been black once, and a bonnet that had been mended at the brim. She carried her own small case, and when she reached the gravel she did not look up at the house with dread. She looked at it, simply the whole shuttered length of it, the boarded orangery, the ivy that had been let go, and something in her face gathered and steadied, as a person steadies who has decided to be equal to a hard thing rather than crushed by it. Radcliffe found that he had straightened from the wall. "His Grace does not receive," Mrs. Alder was saying below, in the flat, careful voice she used with strangers. "I am to see you settled. The Duke will." "The Duke will come down," said Radcliffe, and his own voice, used so little these days, sounded to him like a stone dropped in a dry well. They all turned their faces up to the dark of the stair. He came down into the lamplight slowly, because there was no other way. He came into light now, and he watched the moment arrive that always arrived. Lady Ellingham's smile fixed itself. Honoria made a small sound and pressed her handkerchief to her mouth and looked, quite openly, away. It was the scar they looked from, of course. The ruin the fire had made of the left side of his jaw and the taut-seamed skin that ran down beneath his collar, and along the back of his left hand, the hand he had put into flame 6 years ago and drawn back too late and empty. Men flinched. Women wept or simpered. He had grown so accustomed to being a thing looked away from that he had built a whole life out of sparing everyone the trouble of the glance. The plain girl in grey looked at him. She looked at the scar, because she was neither a fool nor a liar, and he would have despised her for pretending it was not there. She looked at it plainly for the space of one breath, the way she had looked at the ruined house, taking its measure. And then she looked at his eyes and made him a curtsy, an honest one, neither the deep grovel of fear nor the shallow flick of contempt, but the courtesy one gives an equal in a hard hour. "Your Grace," she said, "I am Dulcie Fosgrove. I am sorry to come to you at such an hour, and unasked." Unasked. Not a word of the bargain, not a word of gratitude flung at him like a coin at a beggar, not a plea. Only that plain accuracy, that she had come unasked as he had received her unasked, and that both of them knew it. "You are—" He stopped. He had been about to say the sister, and it was not true. He had heard in the letters his steward had brought him the whole grasping shape of the thing. This was no daughter of the house. "You are Lady Ellingham's stepdaughter," he said instead. "I am," said Dulcie. "By her first husband's first wife," Lady Ellingham put in quickly, as though the distance wanted establishing, as though she would have him know that no blood of hers was being spent here. "A good, biddable girl, your Grace, and healthy, and no trouble to anyone. My own Honoria is of too delicate a constitution for country retirement, but Dulcie has always been suited to quiet. She will do very well for you. Very well indeed." Radcliffe watched the girl while the woman spoke of her as one speaks of a serviceable horse being turned over at the traces. He watched to see the flush of shame, the tightening of the mouth, the thing he would have felt in her place and hated the witnessing of. Dulcie Fosgrove's chin lifted a fraction, that was all. She did not contradict her stepmother, and she did not cringe under her. She simply stood in the lamplight with her mended bonnet and her own case in her hand and bore it, the whole ugly commerce of it, with a dignity that had clearly cost her a great deal, and that she clearly did not mean to let anyone see cost her anything. He found, to his considerable displeasure, that he could not look away from her. "Honoria will be missing her comforts," said Lady Ellingham, already gathering her skirts back toward the carriage now that the goods were delivered. "We must not impose upon his Grace's hospitality by lingering. Dulcie, you will write to me when you are settled." The pause before the word was small and cruel. "Do try to give satisfaction." Honoria did not so much as look at her stepsister. She had already fled back into the shelter of the carriage, and through the glass Radcliffe saw her weeping into her handkerchief with the frank relief of a creature spared. Not one word had she spoken to the woman who was being left in her stead. Not one. Radcliffe had lived among the polished cruelties of his class all his life, and he thought he had seen the whole catalogue of them, but there was a particular baseness in that averted golden head that lodged in him like a splinter. "Madam," he said, and something in the single word stopped Lady Ellingham with her foot upon the carriage step. "Your Grace." He came down the last stair and into the full light, and he had the small grim satisfaction of watching her fight not to recoil. "You have delivered your stepdaughter into a stranger's house at nightfall," he said, "as a man delivers a parcel he is glad to be quit of. You have not asked to see where she is to sleep. You have not asked my intentions toward her, though a child of your own blood would have wrung them out of me on this very gravel. You have not, madam, so much as bid her farewell." His voice did not rise. It never rose now. The fire had taken that from him too, along with much else, and left him a low even register that people found, he knew, more frightening than shouting, "You may go. But do not deceive yourself that anyone here mistakes what you have done." Lady Ellingham's mouth opened and shut. For an instant her face was naked, And it was not shame he saw there but affront, the affront of the small soul discovered. Then the mask came back down. "I am sure your grace is very kind," she said, which meant nothing, and she got herself into the carriage, and the door snapped shut, and the dead limes swallowed the sound of the wheels going away down the avenue. They were left, the three of them, in the lamplight, the Duke, his housekeeper, and the girl who had been left behind. Radcliffe turned to her, braced for what he had earned by his little speech, the flood of gratitude, the tears, the fluttering. He had defended her. Women expected a return on such things. Dulcie Fosgrove was looking at him with an expression he could not at once name, and when he had named it he liked it even less, because it was not gratitude. It was something closer to sorrow, and it was directed, unmistakably, at him. "You ought not to have said that to her, your grace," she said quietly. He was so unused to being reproached that for a moment he only stared. "I beg your pardon?" "It was true," she said. "Every word of it was true, and I dare say she deserved every word, but you did not say it for me. You said it because it eased something in yourself to say it, and now she will go home and tell it all as an outrage done to her, and it is I who will be spoken of, not you. The wronged are always spoken of worse than those who wrong them. You will forgive me. I have had a great deal of time to learn how the thing works." Mrs. Alder drew in a sharp breath at such plainness spoken to the master of Harrow. Radcliffe scarcely heard her. He was looking at this girl in grey who had, in the space of a quarter hour, curtsied to his ruined face without flinching, borne her own sail without a tear, and now stood upon his gravel telling him, with a gentleness that took every sting from it, that his gallantry had been for himself and not for her, and being right. No one had told him he was wrong in 6 years. They had feared him, pitied him, tiptoed round him, closed their faces against the sight of him. His own steward spoke to him with his eyes lowered to the ledgers. His tenants uncovered their heads and hurried past. The few relations who still wrote to him wrote as one writes to a grave that owns land, all condolence and calculation. Not one of them had troubled to tell him a plain true thing to his face, because not one of them had thought him worth the risk, or the labour, or the fright of it. They had let him become a rumour at the end of a lime avenue, a scarred recluse to frighten children with, and he had let them, because it was easier to be a rumour than a man who could still be looked away from in a lamplit yard. "You are frank," he said at last. "I am tired, your grace," she answered, and now, for the first time, something of the long day showed through the steadiness, a fine tremor in the hand that held the case. "And I have found that frankness costs less than pretence, in the end, though it is dearer at the moment of purchase. If I have offended you, I am sorry for it. You have been more just to me tonight than anyone has troubled to be in a long while, and I would not repay it with flattery. You will get flattery enough from everyone else who wants something of you. You want nothing of me but that I be no trouble, and so I may as well be honest." "And are you?" he said. "No trouble?" The corner of her mouth moved not a smile. He would not have called it a smile, but the ghost of where a smile lived in easier times. "That remains to be seen, your grace. I am told I am biddable. I have never found myself so, but perhaps I have been badly observed." Something happened in Radcliffe's chest, some small seized thing turning over that he had thought long since burned dead. He did not welcome it. He had spent 6 years making certain that nothing turned over in there, that the house stayed shut and the shutters stayed nailed and no light got in to show him what the fire had left. And now a penniless stepdaughter, sold to him to spare a weeping fool, was standing on his steps with her own case in her hand and looking at his scar as though it were merely a fact about him and not the whole of him, and he could not, for the life of him, look away. "Mrs. Alder," he said, and was displeased to find he had to clear his throat to say it, "Miss Fosgrove will have the blue rooms in the east front. They are dry, and they take the morning sun. See that there is a fire lit and something hot sent up. She has travelled far." Mrs. Alder, who had expected to be told to put the girl in whatever damp corner would do for a bought bride, looked at her master for a long moment. Then she said, "Yes, your grace," and something in the flat, careful voice had thawed by a degree. "The east front," Dulcie repeated. She looked up at the dark house again, at its rows of shuttered windows, and Ratcliffe watched her do the sum of it, that the east front took the morning, that a man who never left his shadowed west wing had just given her the best light in the house, and had known what he was doing when he gave it. "It is nothing," he said, before she could make it something. "The rooms want airing. You may as well air them as let them rot." "Of course," she said gravely, and did not thank him, and he understood that she had withheld the thanks on purpose, because she had seen that he could not have borne them. That gratitude from her would have been one more thing looked away from, and she would not do to him what he had spent 6 years unable to endure. The plainness of it, the sheer merciful accuracy of it, undid him more than any kindness could have. "You will not see much of me," he said, retreating already, feeling for the familiar dark. "I keep to the west of the house. I dine alone. You will have the run of the gardens and the library and whatever will make the days pass. What I ask is only what your stepmother promised on your behalf, that you be no trouble, and ask nothing of me that I cannot give." "And what is it, your grace," said Dulcie Fosgrove, from the foot of his stair, in the last of the lamplight, "that you cannot give?" He should have turned and gone up into his dark and not answered. He had not answered a question truly put to him in 6 years. But she had asked it without slyness, without the angling for advantage that lay under every question anyone else put to him, and the honesty of it drew an honesty out of him that he had not known was still there to be drawn. "A great many things, Miss Fosgrove," he said. "You will find the list is long. I would spare you the discovering of it. I have generally found," she said, "that the things people cannot give are only the things they have been too long afraid to try. But I shall not press you. You are cold, and so am I, and there is a fire being lit for me that I mean to be grateful for, even if you would rather I were not." And she made him her honest curtsy again, over the case she would not let anyone carry, and turned to follow Mrs. Alder up the steps into the shuttered house. Radcliffe stood on the gravel a moment longer than he meant to, in the dawn, watching the small grey figure go in at his door. The dead limes creaked. Somewhere above, a light bloomed in the east front where there had been no light for years, gold against the black glass, and he found himself looking up at it the way a man looks at a thing he did not know he had wanted until it was suddenly, impossibly there. Then he went in, and up into his own dark, and shut the door of the west wing behind him as he had shut it every night for 6 years. But he did not, this night, feel the door as a comfort. He felt it, for the first time in a long while, as a door, a thing that shut, and might be opened, and behind which a man had been hiding from the whole living world. He stood in his cold room with the fire unlit, because he would not have Mrs. Alder in to light it. And he thought of a mended bonnet and a plainly spoken truth and a curtsy given to his ruin, as though his ruin were merely a fact and not a sentence. And he understood, with a kind of dread that was not entirely unpleasant, that he was not going to be able to keep to the west of the house. The letter came on a Thursday, borne up the long avenue by a hired boy who would not dismount within the gates, and Grissom carried it to the library upon a salver, as though it might sting him. Radcliffe knew the hand before he broke the seal. He had seen it once already, 3 weeks before, in this very house. "Lady Ellingham," he said aloud to the fire, and heard how the name curdled in the quiet room. It was a masterwork of its kind, all maternal solicitude, a mother's natural yearning to see her dear stepdaughter settled and content, and might she presume upon his Grace's famous generosity to call, some evening soon, and bring her daughter Honoria, who had grieved so at the parting. There was a great deal in it about grieving. There was nothing at all about £6,000, which had gone unclaimed since the widow's man of business had, upon examining the note at York, found it worth rather less than the paper it was written upon. He ought to have burned it and turned the carriage at the gate should it dare to come. He had not dined with company since before the fire, and did not intend to begin now for the sake of a woman who had tried to sell him a wife and would, given the smallest opening, try to sell him something worse. And yet he did not burn it. What stayed his hand was not the widow at all. It was the thought, unbidden, unwelcome, of Dulcie Fosgrove standing in his cold hall, and saying that she would not be spoken of as a chair. 3 weeks she had kept his house. Moving through his dark rooms with her sleeves turned back and a ring of keys at her waist, arguing with tradesmen who thought a duke's household could be cheated in its master's grief, coaxing light back into chambers shut since the burning, and never once. This was the thing that would not leave him, flinching from the sight of him when he came upon her unawares. He had taken to coming upon her unawares a great deal more often than his affairs required. She had become a fact of his house, and it occurred to him now that the woman meant to remind Dulcie of what she was, a portioned-off nuisance, a girl put away. He found he did not wish her reminded, and found, with a soreness at his own expense, that he wished to be present when the reminding was attempted, to see how she bore it. "Grissom," he said, "we shall receive Lady Ellingham and her daughter to dine. Thursday next. Open the Crimson Parlour, and have cooked what she can. Tell Miss Fosgrove." Grissom's face, which had learned in 6 years not to register anything at all, registered something. "To dine, Your Grace. I am aware of the novelty. You need not underline it." He told himself it was strategy. A man kept his enemies where he might watch them, and did not examine the matter further, having grown skilled at not examining matters that would not bear it. It was Dulcie herself who brought the wine list up to be approved, 2 evenings before, standing in the library doorway with the ledger against her hip, and regarding him with that levelness he had ceased to find impertinent and begun, against all sense, to look for. "Your Grace means to dine with them," she said. "It was not quite a question. I mean to observe them dining. There is a difference. Have you an objection?" "An objection." She turned the word over honestly, the way she turned everything over. "No, Your Grace. Only a caution, if you will hear it. My stepmother does nothing without a purpose, and her purposes wear pretty gowns. She has come because she has heard somewhere that the beast of the north did not eat me after all, and that gives her a new sum to work." A faint colour touched her cheek. "I say beast because it is the word they use, not because it is mine. I have never found you one. You have found me a poor bargain and an uncomfortable master. You said so in this house the first hour I knew you. I said the house was not kind. I did not say the man was not." She opened the ledger to the marked page. "The Rhenish is turned, so I have struck it. Your Grace need not spend a fortune to impress a woman who cannot be impressed, only fed." He nearly smiled. He was doing that a great deal now, catching the thing before it reached the scarf of his mouth where it would sit so strangely. "You do not think much of your stepmother's judgment." "I think a great deal of it. That is why I fear it." She straightened. "She will bring Honoria dressed like a bride, Your Grace. I only say so that you are not taken by surprise. And I would ask one thing, if I may ask anything. Ask that whatever passes at your table Thursday, you will remember it was not my doing." Her chin came up a degree. "I am your housekeeper. I will see the dinner served and the plate counted after, and I will do it well, because it is my work. But I will not be paraded before them as a lesson, and I will not sit at your table to be looked over beside my sister like 2 horses at a fair. I should rather serve than sit. I want that understood before they come." "It is understood," he said, and then, because the words came before he could shut them in, "though it is a poor arithmetic that seats the wrong sister below stairs." Something moved behind her eyes, quick and startled, and was mastered. "Your Grace flatters, which I did not think was among your vices." "It is not. I never flatter. It commits one to a good opinion one may not hold tomorrow." He turned back to the fire, giving her the ruined side, the old reflex. "You may serve if you would rather serve. But you mistake my meaning if you think I said it to be kind." He did not see her face as she left. He heard the door and the small hush of her tread down the stone passage, and he sat a long time after with the wine list unread in his hand. Thursday came grey and early to darkness, and by 6 the Crimson Parlour had been dragged out of its shrouds and lit, a great fire roaring where none had burned in years, and Radcliffe stood before it in a coat that Grissom had aired 3 times to drive the camphor from it. Feeling like a man dressed for his own strange funeral, the carriage came up the avenue at 7. He heard the crunch of it, the widow's voice pitched to carry, and he composed the ruined side of his face into the light where it would do its work, and waited to be looked at. Lady Ellingham swept in upon a cloud of lavender water, and behind her came Honoria. He saw at once what Dulcie had meant. The girl was got up like a bride indeed, white muslin, a wreath of hothouse roses, a face pretty in the smooth, uninhabited way of a face that had never been argued with, and she was propelled into the room by her mother's hand and arranged before the fire like a piece brought to auction. She had been coached plainly not to look at his face, and so she looked everywhere, but at the cornice, the carpet, the fire irons, and the not looking was its own long insolence, worse by far than a plain stare. "Your Grace is too good, the widow was saying. "What a transformation you have wrought upon these poor dear rooms, and how kind to receive us, when I know your Grace's health has kept you so retired these years, such a trial, such a loss to the county." "Sit, madam," Radcliffe said, "before you exhaust your whole stock of feeling before the soup." They sat, and the dinner began, and Dulcie Fosgrove served it. She came in behind the footman with the tureen, in a plain dark gown, her hair drawn back, and set about her work with a quiet competence that made the two guests seem suddenly loud and ill-made beside her. Radcliffe watched her over the rim of his glass, and watched the widow watch her, and saw the whole cruelty of the evening laid bare in the first minute of it, as neat as a hand of cards turned face up, for Lady Ellingham had not come to be reminded that Dulcie was in service. She had come to display it. Every phrase was a small knife, dressed in solicitude and slid in smiling. "Dulcie, you may pour for his Grace. She has always a steady hand. We used her a great deal at home. Honoria, of course, never so much as buttered her own bread. We could not have such an ornament in the still-room, but this one was ever the useful sort, no false pride in her, which is a mercy given her circumstances. How naturally she takes to it. One would think she had been bred to service, and in a manner she has. Poor thing." Poor Edmund's affairs being what they were, Radcliffe set down his glass. He had thought himself past being moved by anything a drawing-room creature could contrive. But listening to the widow flay her stepdaughter with a smile across his own table, he felt a cold anger rising that he had not known since the early days after the fire, when the whole world had seemed a thing to be struck. He looked at Dulcie to see how she bore it. That was why he had permitted the wretched evening, after all, and what he saw silenced the anger and left something graver in its place. She bore it perfectly. She poured his wine with a steady hand and did not spill a drop. She answered the barbs when an answer was demanded of her, in a low even voice, without heat and without cringing. "Yes, madam, as you say, madam," and she did not want him for rescue, nor let the humiliation reach her face. Only he, who had made a study of concealment, who had performed the very same feat before people who wished to pity him, could see the cost of it, in the too careful set of her shoulders and the whiteness at the knuckles of the hand that held the ladle. She was doing precisely what he had done for 6 years, standing in a warm, bright room full of people who had decided what she was, and refusing to give them the satisfaction of her wound. He had thought her merely unafraid of him. He understood now that it was more than courage. It was dignity of a kind he had believed burned out of the world, a dignity that owed nothing to fortune or face, or the good opinion of the smiling woman dismembering her, that stood on nothing but itself. She was the poorest person in the room and beyond any question the finest, and every soul at the table knew it but the two who had come to prove otherwise. "Miss Fosgrove," he said. The room stilled. He had addressed the servant, was not done. The widow's fork paused above her plate. "Your Grace," said Dulcie, from beside the sideboard, "you will set down that dish and take the chair at my left. Grissom will finish the serving." He did not raise his voice. He had never needed to. "You have kept my house 3 weeks, and I have not once had the courtesy of your conversation over a meal. I find I prefer it to the conversation I have been given. Sit, your Grace." The widow began, in a voice gone thin. "Madame, you came a great distance to see your stepdaughter settled and content. Observe her settled at my table." He held Dulcie's eyes across the bright appalled length of the table. "Sit, Miss Fosgrove. I ask it. I do not command it. There is a difference, and you above all people in this house know it." For a long moment she did not move, and he thought she might refuse him out of the same iron that had made her refuse to be sold. But she set the dish down upon the sideboard very carefully, and crossed the room, and took the chair at his left hand, and sat among them as more than an equal, her chin level and her housekeeper's keys still at her waist, and she looked at Honoria's wreath of purchased roses and at her stepmother's stricken civility and said, quite gently, "The soup is getting cold, madam. You should eat it while it is hot. I made sure of the pepper myself." Radcliffe looked down at his plate so that no one at his table should see what happened to his face. The dinner did not last long after that. There is a limit to how long a woman may sit smiling at a table where her whole design has collapsed beneath her, and Lady Ellingham reached it between the fish and the game, pleading the length of the road and the delicacy of Honoria's constitution. Radcliffe did not press them to stay. He saw them to the hall himself, and at the door the widow made one last small cast of the line. "I had hoped," she said, low, at his shoulder, watching Honoria settled into her furs, "that your grace might find on better acquaintance, that my Honoria, a lady of true refinement, unspoilt, might suit a house such as this far better than—" a glance, delicate as a stiletto, toward the passage where Dulcie had gone, "than one already so reduced. A duke has his line to think of, your grace. One does not raise an hair out of the still-room." He looked at her a long moment. The fire threw the ruin of his face into full relief, and he let it, and watched her not look at it, and found her, at last, wholly beneath his anger. "Madam," he said pleasantly, "you have twice now offered me a Fosgrove, and twice offered me the wrong one. I begin to think you do not know the value of your own goods. Grissom will see you to your carriage. Do not trouble to write again." He shut the great door on the cold and the sound of the wheels, and stood a moment in the sudden quiet, his heart beating in a manner he did not like, too fast, too high, like a man who has walked further out along a ledge than he meant to and only now looked down. He found Dulcie in the parlour, counting the plate. She did it by candlelight, the pieces laid in rows on a baize cloth, and she did not stop when he came in, only finished her row and made her mark in the little book before she looked up. Whatever had passed at the table, she had put away again. She was a housekeeper counting silver, and she meant him to see nothing else. 14 forks, your grace, and all present," she said. "Your household is honest, or your guests were watched." I could not say which, Miss Fosgrove. He did not know, having come, what he had come to say. That was a novelty in itself. He had spent 6 years knowing precisely what he meant before he opened his mouth. "What I did at that table, seating you, I would not have you think." He stopped, and began again, more plainly, because plainness was the only currency they had ever dealt in. "I did not do it to shame your stepmother, or not chiefly. I did it because it was intolerable to watch, and I have watched a great many intolerable things in this house and learned to sit still under them, and tonight I found I could not. That is all. I would not have you read more into it than the thing itself." She set down the fork she was holding. She looked at him a long moment in the wavering light, and the levelness of her gaze had something new in it, something that had not been there in 3 weeks of ledgers and keys, and it frightened him more than the widow ever could. "Your grace," she said slowly, "for a man who never flatters, you are at great trouble tonight to persuade me that a kindness was not one. It was not a kindness. It was a one of self-command. Then I have never seen a man so undone by good manners." A small breath of something almost like laughter went out of her. "I saw your face, your grace, when she said I had been bred to service. You were angry, not the cold anger you keep for callers, the other kind, the kind a man feels for a hurt done to himself. Why should you be angry on my account? I am nothing to you, a housekeeper until I choose not to. Your own articles say so." And there it was, laid out on the baize among the counted forks, the question he had carried into the room and had not the courage to set down. Why? Why the anger? Why the 3 weeks of coming upon her unawares? Why his heart was beating still like a thing let out of a cage? He looked at Dulcie Fosgrove in the candlelight, and felt the whole shut architecture of himself lean toward her stone by stone, and did the only thing 6 years had left him fit to do. He closed the door of himself and set the bar across it. "You are quite right," he said, and his voice was the old voice, the marble one that made people flinch. "It was ill-considered and will not happen again. You are my housekeeper, and I keep my table to myself, and you were correct to prefer to serve. Finish your count, Miss Fosgrove." "It grows late." He turned and gave her the ruined side and made for the door. "Leave the candles for Grissom. Good night." "Good night, your grace," she said quietly behind him, and he heard in the 2 small words that she had seen the door close and understood exactly what it was, and had let him shut it, because she was too proud and too kind to hold a man against a bar he had spent his whole grief building. He went up through the dark house to his cold rooms and did not sleep. He lay listening to the wind find the old cracks, and told himself he had done rightly, that he had shut a dangerous thing before it could grow, that a duke with half a face and a house full of shadows had no business letting his heart lean toward a girl her own family had priced at nothing. He told himself all of it in the marble voice, and believed not one word, for he could not. However, he turned upon the pillow, stopped seeing her, the whiteness at her knuckles, the level eyes across the candlelight asking him why. He would have given a great deal that night to be a man who could have answered. A fortnight is a long while to keep to one half of a house. Radcliffe had done it more or less. He rose in the dark of the west wing, and he took his meals alone at the great cold table, where a single cover was laid, and he rode out only when the light had gone, on the paths where no tenant would meet him. And he told himself each day that this was the whole of his life, and had been the whole of his life for 6 years, and would be so until the estate passed to whatever cousin the lawyers eventually settled it upon. He told himself this with great firmness. He found that firmness required more telling than it once had, for the house had begun to change around him in small ways he could not account for and could not, try as he might, resent. A shutter that had been nailed across the morning room these 6 years stood open now, and light fell across a floor no light had touched since the fire. The covered glass in the long gallery had lost its Holland sheet. He had come upon his own ruined reflection there one evening and stood before it a full minute, not in horror but in a kind of grim wonder, before he understood that someone had judged a covered mirror a sadder thing than a scoured face and quietly acted upon the judgment. A bowl of the late roses, the small hardy ones that had gone half wild along the south wall, appeared upon the hall table and was renewed when it faded. No one told him she did these things. No one needed to. Mrs. Alder had kept his house faithfully for years and had never once uncovered a mirror, and he knew the difference between a servant who keeps a house shut against grief and a woman who had decided, without a word of argument, that the shutting had gone on long enough. He should have forbidden it. That was the plain fact he turned over in the dark. A word to Grissom and the shutters would go up again, and the sheets go back over the glass, and the house return to the ordered mausoleum he had made of it. He did not say the word. He told himself he'd not say it because the thing was trivial, beneath the Duke's notice, not worth the disturbance. He knew, in the honest part of him, that she had somehow pried open on his own gravel that first night, that he did not say it because he liked, God help him, coming down a corridor and finding it full of light, and he thought of her. That was the graver trouble, the one no shutter could mend. He thought of her at the cold table and on the dark rides and in the long reaches of the night when sleep would not come. He thought of the plain accuracy with which she had told him his gallantry was for himself. He thought of her curtsy given to his ruin, as though his ruin were merely a fact. He thought of her low steady voice, saying that the things people cannot give are only the things they have been too long afraid to try. He had built 6 years of silence to keep himself from being seen, and a portionless girl in a mended bonnet had walked in out of a storm and seen him, and he could not now unmake the being seen, and did not, in the traitorous middle of the night, entirely wish to. It was this, he supposed afterward, that carried him to the library on the 14th evening, on a pretext so thin that even Grissom would not have credited it, that he wished to consult a volume of the county histories, which he had not opened in a decade and had no earthly need of now. He carried a candle through the east passage where he never went, and he pushed open the library door telling himself the room would be empty, and it was not. She was in the window seat with her feet drawn up under her like a girl half her age, a book open on her knee and the last of the daylight failing blue behind her, and she had not heard the door. He might have withdrawn. He stood instead in the shadow of the jamb and looked at the way he had promised himself he would not look at anyone again, at the brown head bent over the page, the frown of concentration, the way her lips moved very slightly over a hard sentence, and the candle in his hand betrayed him with its light. She looked up. She did not start or scramble, or drop her feet guiltily to the floor. She marked her place with one finger and regarded him gravely across the dim room. Your Grace, I did not think you came to this side of the house. I do not, he said, and heard how absurd it sounded, standing there as he was, well within the walls of the side of the house he did not come to. Something that in another man might have been humour moved at the scarred corner of his mouth. I came for the county histories. Third case, I believe, on the upper shelf. They are on the lower shelf, said Dulcie Fosgrove, in the second case, and there are field mice living behind them, for I disturbed a whole nation of them dusting on Tuesday. I would not reach in blindly if I were your Grace. She set her book aside and rose, smoothing her grey skirt. "But I do not think you came for the histories." He might have taken offence at that. A fortnight before he would have taken offence at it, would have wrapped his reserve about him like a cloak and left the room, and thought of her all the more for having fled her. He was tired, tonight, of fleeing rooms. "No," he admitted. "I did not." He came in and set the candle on the great table, and its light pushed the blue dusk back into the corners. "I find the house too quiet with someone new in it. That is a foolish thing to say. It was quiet enough these 6 years, and I called it peace. Now there is a shutter open here, and a bowl of roses there, and a mirror uncovered in the gallery, and I cannot settle to my own silence for wondering what will be different in the morning." "I will nail the shutters shut again if your grace wishes it," she said, and there was no sulk in it, only the plain offer. I overstepped. "It is not my house to open. You will do nothing of the kind." It came out harder than he intended, and he saw her mark it and softened it. "Leave them. Leave the glass. I have looked at myself in it, and I did not die of the sight, which I confess surprised me." He turned from her, an old habit, giving her the ruined side of his face, and then deliberately, an act of will that cost him more than she could know, he turned back and let her have the whole of it in the candlelight. "You uncovered that mirror on purpose." "I did." "Why?" She considered the question as though it deserved considering, which was itself a kind of gift. People did not consider his questions. They only hurried to answer them in whatever way would soonest let them escape him. "Because a house full of covered glass is a house that has decided to stop looking at itself," she said at last. "And I did not think your grace had decided that. I thought your grace had been told to decide it by grief, which is a hard master and a poor counsellor, had never been given cause to decide otherwise. That is all. I did not mean to physic you. I only cannot abide a sheet over a mirror. It looks like a house in mourning, and I have had my fill of mourning, and I did not come here to keep living in it." There it was, the small door opening. He crossed to the window seat and did not sit, but stood near enough to see the book she had laid aside. Not a novel, he saw, but a treatise on the management of orchards, of all things, and near enough to see, in the failing light, that the steadiness she wore like armor had a girl inside it after all. "You spoke once of Larkmere," he said. "Before it was sold. That was your father's place." It was. She looked out at the dark garden. A small manor, no grander than a good farmhouse, but the orchards were the best in 3 parishes, and my father loved them past all sense. He would take me out among the trees at pruning and name me each variety as though he were presenting me to old friends. My mother died when I was 9, and after that it was only the 2 of us and the orchards, and I did not know we were poor, because we were rich in the only coin I understood." She said it without a tremor, but her hands had folded themselves tightly in her lap. "Then he married Lady Ellingham. He was lonely, and she was a handsome widow with a pretty daughter and a great deal of charm when charm would serve her, and he thought he was giving me a mother and a sister. He was 3 years dying of a wasting illness, and every year of it she spent the estate down to the walls, and when he died there was nothing the orchards mortgaged. Larkmere sold to pay what he had never known he owed, and I passed to her keeping like a stick of furniture that came with the debts. I have been these 2 years the poor relation who eats a favoured daughter's bread, and is reminded of it at every meal, and now I am here." She turned her head and looked up at him, and there was no self-pity in her face, none, only a clear-eyed reckoning with what her life had made of her. "I tell your grace this not to be pitied. I would rather be struck than pitied. I tell it because you asked, and because you have been more honest with me than anyone in 2 years, and honesty ought to be answered in its own coin." He found he had nothing to say for a moment. He who had a whole armory of cold words, who could dismiss a man with a phrase and had done, found that the plain account of her losses had emptied him of everything but the wish so long dead in him he did not at first recognize it to be of some use to another human creature. He had thought in the vanity of his own suffering that he had cornered the market on loss, that no one who came smiling and whole into his hall could know what it was to have the ground taken out from beneath a life. He had been wrong. Here was a woman who had lost as much as he, and lost it younger, and with none of the 10,000 a year that had cushioned his own fall into the dark, and she had not boarded up her windows over it. She had gone on uncovering other people's mirrors. He did not know how it was done. He found he very much wished to learn. You loved the orchards, he said, foolishly, because it was the only thing among all she had told him that he thought he might do something about. That is why the treatise. The smile she gave him then was the first true one he had seen from her, unguarded, lighting the whole plain face of her into something he would not afterward be able to unsee. You have a boarded orangery going to ruin at the end of your south walk, your grace, and half an acre of espaliers strangled in bindweed that were somebody's pride once, and it near breaks my heart to pass them. I have been reading how they might be saved. I do not suppose I shall be here long enough to save them, but one cannot pass a dying thing that might be made to live and not want to try. I dare say that is a fault in me. It is not a fault, said Radcliffe very low. The light had almost gone. Outside the tall window the garden lay in its blue ruin, and on some impulse he did not examine, he said, "Come and show me," and she rose without hesitation, and they went out together through the garden door into the cool of the failing evening, the candle left behind. Only the last grey light to walk by. She led him down the south walk between the strangled espaliers, naming them as her father had named them to her here, a pair that had been trained flat against the wall and torn half free. There an apple gone to water shoots and canker, and he walked beside her and listened, and could not have said afterward a word of what she told him about the trees, because he was attending only to the fact of walking beside her in the open air, with no wall between them and no dark to hide in. At the turn of the walk the boarded orangery reared up black against the last of the sky, its long windows blind, the roof fallen at the western end, and she went toward it as she went toward everything, plainly meaning to look. That is far enough. She stopped. She had heard, he knew, the thing that had come into his voice thing. He could not keep out of it whenever he came within sight of that ruin, which was why he never came within sight of it, why the south walk was one more country he had ceded to the dark. She did not press toward the door. But neither did she pretend she had not heard. There was a fire here, she said quietly, not a question. She had eyes. She could read a scarred face and a boarded ruin and set the one beside the other. This is where it was. Yes. The word came of him like a stone. Ask me nothing else. I mean that kindly, Miss Fosgrove, more kindly than I have the art to say. There are doors in this house I have kept shut for good reason. You have opened the shutters and I have let you, and I have been the better for it, whatever I pretend. But not this one. Not this. I was not going to open it, she said. I know a door that is shut with the whole weight of a man against it. I would not push at such a door for the world. And then, because she was who she was and would not leave a wounded thing untended even when the tending was only a word, she added low, but a thing shut up as tight as that, your grace, it does not keep, I know. I have shut things so and thought them safe, and found they only grew the darker for the shutting. I say no more, I only say I have found it so. He looked at her in the last of the light, this girl who had lost her mother and her father and her home and her very name's worth in the world, and who stood before the ruin of his life telling him, without a grain of pity, that grief does not keep. The wind moved in the strangled trees. And he was seized, standing there, by a longing so sudden and so entire that it frightened him more than any grief had the longing to close the arm's length of dark between them, to take the cold plain hand that hung at her side and warm it in his ruined one, to be, for one moment, not the beast at the end of the lime avenue, but a man standing near a woman in a garden at dusk. His hand rose. He was scarcely aware of willing it. Her eyes went to it and did not flinch from the seamed and twisted skin of it, the hand he had put into the flame, and she did not draw back. And for the space of a breath they stood so, his ruined hand lifted and hers unmoving, the space between them no wider than a held breath and thinner every instant. Then a light bobbed at the top of the south walk, and Mrs. Alder's voice came down through the dusk. Miss Fosgrove. Miss, are you there? The kitchen is asking after the morning orders, and the moment broke like ice underfoot, and he let his hand fall and stepped back, and put the dark and the distance between them again with a speed that was itself a kind of confession. You are wanted, he said, and his voice had gone flat and cold, the old voice, the well he dropped stones into. Go in, it grows chill. Your grace, go in, Miss Fosgrove. She went. He watched the grey of her climb the walk toward the lamp. And he stood alone before the boarded ruin as he had stood alone on the gravel a fortnight since, and he understood with perfect clarity, and with something close to terror, that the thing he had spent 6 years making certain could never happen to him again had happened, quietly, without his leave. In the space of 14 days that he had let a woman near enough to be lost, and that behind those black and fallen windows lay the whole reason he could never let her nearer. The anniversary of it was 3 weeks off. It came every year like a tide, and every year it found him alone, and he had counted on being alone for it as a man counts on the one dark comfort left to him. He did not know now, standing in the cold with his ruined hand still remembering the nearness of hers, how he was to bear it with her under his roof, or how, God forgive him, he was to bear it if she were not. The 3 weeks did not pass. They were spent, rather, as a miser spends a dwindling purse, each day counted out with dread and none of it buying him any peace. Radcliffe kept to the West Wing more strictly than he had kept to it in a year, and it did him no good at all. He had thought the walls would hold him. He had built his whole life on the notion that a man could wall a thing away and be safe from it, and every morning of those 3 weeks gave the notion the lie, for the woman he was walling out had a way of arriving in the room before her feet did. He would hear her voice 2 corridors off, giving the morning orders in that low, even tone, and find that he had stopped with his coffee halfway to his mouth to listen. He would come on the uncovered mirror in the gallery and see not his own ruin in it, but the memory of her hand on the sheet that had covered it. He had ceded her the shutters and the roses and the strangled espaliers, and now it seemed she had taken the inside of his head as well, and he could not order her out of that as he could have ordered her out of a room, and the tide came on. He knew its coming the way a man with an old wound knows the turn of the weather. The nights grew longer at the wrong end. He woke before it was light with his heart going like a hunted thing and the smell of smoke in his nostrils that was not there, that had not been there for 6 years, that his own mind manufactured out of the dark to torment him. On the 3rd of those bad mornings he found he had risen and dressed and walked, without deciding to, down the east passage to the library door, and stood outside it with his hand raised to the wood before he understood what he was doing, that he had come, like a beast to water, to the one place in the house where he was not alone with it. He took his hand from the door. He went back to the cold and the dark of his own wing, and he did not go again, and the not going was the hardest labor he had set himself in years. She marked the change in him. Of course she marked it. She marked everything. It was the whole terror of her. She did not press, but she began to leave things in his way, a lamp lit in the passage he took at night, so that he need not go down it in the dark. A plate of the small ginger biscuits Mrs. Alder used to make and had not made in years, set on the cold table beside his single cover without a word, and one grey morning a spray of the last roses led across the sill of the west wing window where he could not fail to see it, the hardy wild ones, already browning at the edge because the season was nearly done. It undid him more than kindness had any right to. He had armoured himself against pity and against charm, and against the whole practised repertoire of women who had wanted his name or his 10,000 a year. And he had no armour at all against a browning rose laid on a sill by someone who wanted nothing and only saw that a man was suffering, and could not walk past the suffering without setting some small thing against it. He came upon her at last on the evening before the day. He had not meant to. He had gone down to the morning room she had unshuttered, thinking it would be empty at that hour, thinking to sit for a while in the last of a room that held some light, and she was there at the long window with a basket of mending in her lap, and she looked up, and whatever was in his face made her set the mending aside at once. "Sit down, Your Grace," she said very quietly, as one speaks to a man swaying on his feet. "You're grey as ash. Sit down before you fall. I did not know you were here." He heard his own voice come out cracked and strange. He did not sit. He stood in the doorway with the door frame under his hand, holding to it. "Forgive me. I will go." "You will not." She was up and across the room before he had finished, and she did not touch him. She was too wise for that, but she stood near enough that he felt the warmth of her the way one feels a fire through a closed hand. "It is tomorrow, whatever it is. I have watched it coming on you for a fortnight like a fever, and it breaks tomorrow, and you have set yourself to bear it alone in that cold wing as you have borne it alone 6 times before." She looked up into his face without a shade of fear. Do not. That is all I came to say, though I did not know I meant to say it until now. Whatever it is, do not bear it alone this time. There is no virtue in it. There is only the cold. And that the plain mercy of it, offered by a woman who owed him nothing, and had been given to him like a stick of furniture that came with another woman's debts, that was what broke the 6 years' silence open. He had not meant to tell her. He had sworn he never would. But she had laid the door of it in his path so gently and asked for nothing, and he was so tired, God, he was so tired of holding the whole weight of it against the dark with no one on the other side. There was a fire, he said. You know that. You saw the orangery. I saw it. It was not the orangery. He let go the doorframe and moved past her to the window, to the safe blue dark of the garden, so that he need not say it to her face. It was the east wing that stands boarded now, and will stand boarded till it falls. My wife was there. He heard her go very still behind him. Cordelia, we had been married 4 years, and they were not. I will not lie to a woman who does not lie. They were not 4 happy years. She had married a duke and found she had got a silent, jealous, ungenerous man, and I had married a beauty and found she wearied of the country and of me, and we had come, the pair of us, to that cold civil war that people of our rank conduct behind good manners and never end. I was not kind to her. I want that said plainly, because everyone in 3 counties tells it the other way, that I was the wronged and grieving husband, and I will not have you told the same lie. I was not kind. I begrudged her the town she pined for. I kept her here. Radcliffe. It was the first time she had ever used his name. He did not stop. There was a child. His voice did not break on it. It had gone past breaking into the flat country beyond. A boy, 2 years old. Alaric. He had my mother's eyes and none of my temper yet, and he was the one wholly good thing the marriage had made, and I loved him past all the sense I had left. He set his ruined hand flat against the cold glass and looked at it. The fire began in the night, in the nursery flue that I had been told wanted mending and had put off, because I put off everything in those years, because I was a man who let good things go to ruin sooner than trouble himself. It went up the east wing like a torch. By the time the house was roused, it had the nursery floor and the stair. Cordelia had gone up to the boy. She was many things I could not forgive, and she was that. She went up for him without a thought, and the floor was between them, and the stair was gone. And I came out into the court in my nightshirt and heard them at the window above me, both of them, her voice and his, over the noise of it. Behind him he heard her breathing, and nothing else. She did not weep or exclaim or come to him. She let him say it. It was the greatest gift anyone had given him in 6 years, and he did not know until long after that it had been a gift at all. I went in, he said. There was a way, the old still-room stair, that came up behind the nursery, and I knew it, and I went up it with my coat over my head, and I got as far as the nursery door. It was afire, the whole frame of it. I put my hand, he lifted the seamed and twisted hand off the glass and turned it in the last light. I put my hand to the latch and held it there while I worked it, and the latch was iron and the iron was. He stopped. He did not finish that. The door would not come. Something had fallen against it within. I could hear him on the other side of it, so near, an arm's length of burning wood, and I could not. The flat country gave out under him at last, and his voice went. I could not get through. They brought me out over their shoulders raving, and the roof of the east wing came down within the hour, and I lived, and they did not. And that is the whole of it. And now you know what the county knows, and worse, because the county thinks I ran mad with grief, and I did not. I ran mad with the plain fact that I had let the flue go, and begrudged her the town, and put off every mending thing in my house until my house burned my son alive with me clawing at a door I could not open. That is the man you have been uncovering mirrors for, Miss Fosgrove. Now cover them again. The room was quite dark. He had not turned. He stood with his back to her and his ruined hand hanging at his side, and he waited for the thing he had waited 6 years to be spared, and had walled himself away to be spared the drawing back, the hush of horror, the pity that was worse than horror. He had told her the whole of it precisely so that she would draw back. He understood that standing there. He had not been unburdening himself. He had been driving her off, in the only coin cruel enough to do it. because he had felt his hand rise toward hers in the garden dusk, and had known with perfect certainty that a man who had let his own child burn had no business warming his ruined hand at a living woman, that the kindest thing left in him was to make her run. She did not run. He heard her cross the floor, unhurried, and she came round to his side where he could not avoid her without turning his whole body away, and she looked up at him in the dark, and her face held no horror and no pity either, but something far harder to bear than both, a steady, clear-eyed grief that was not for herself. "You have carried that 6 years," she said, "and told no one, and let them all believe the softer lie, because the true one was more than you could set down in front of another soul. And now you have set it down in front of me, meaning me to be sickened by it." She shook her head slowly. "I am not sickened. I am sorry. Those are different things, and you have forgotten the difference, because you have had nothing but the one for 6 years and no one to give you the other." "You did not hear me." His voice came harsh. "I killed them. Through sloth and pride and a flu I would not mend. I heard every word." She didn't raise her voice. She never did. It was one of the ways she was stronger than he. "I heard a man tell me he loved a boy past all sense, and went up a burning stair for him and held his own hand in the fire trying to reach him. That is what I heard. You have spent 6 years telling yourself the other story, that you are a murderer who happened to be scarred, and I will not tell it back to you, your grace, because it is not true, and I've had my fill of untrue things. A flue wants mending in every great house in England. It is only that in most of them the fire never comes, and the master goes to his grave never knowing what small neglect he was spared. You were not spared. That is your grief, and it is a terrible one. It is not your crime. He had not wept in 6 years. He had not been able to. The thing had frozen in him too hard for weeping. He did not weep now quite, but something moved in the frozen country that had not moved since the roof came down, and it frightened him worse than the fire. "Go away from me," he said. And then, because she did not move, and because the not moving was pulling the frozen thing loose faster than he could bear, he turned on her the whole armory he had left, the cold flat well voice, the voice that had cleared his hall of every hopeful mother and scheming girl in 6 years. "You mistake this for something it is not, Miss Fosgrove. You have made a project of me as you have made a project of my espaliers, a ruined thing that might, with enough patient bindweed pulling, be coaxed to live. It flatters you to think so, but I am not an orchard. I do not come back with pruning. You were sent here to be rid of, by a woman who wished you gone, and you have mistaken a lonely man's want of company for something that might make a life, and it cannot, and the kindest use I can put my last decency to is to tell you so plainly. When your quarter is out you will go from here with a settlement that will keep you, and you will not stay to waste your one good life warming a dead man's hand. Do you understand me? I am past saving, and I will not have you break yourself against the proof of it." He watched the words land. He watched them hurt her. He was cruel enough, still, to aim them where they would hurt, at the pride that was all a portionless woman had, at the very kindness she had shown him, and he hated himself for the watching, and he did it because he did not know another way to save her from him, and he was too much a coward to find one. She was quiet a long moment. When she spoke her voice was not unsteady, but it had gone very low. "That was well aimed," she said. "You are right that I have no rank and no fortune and nothing to break but myself, and you have found the place to strike it. I will remember that you can do that when you have a mind to." She stepped back from him 1 step, and it was worse than any horror could have been, that single step of hers into the dock. "I will not trouble your grace's last decency any further tonight. But I will say one thing, and then I will go, because you have been honest with me, and I will pay you in the same coin to the last. You did not tell me all that to sicken me. You told me because you have been drowning 6 years, and I am the first hand you have felt in the water, and it terrifies you worse than the drowning. I know. I have been in that water, so I will not argue with you, your grace. A man who has decided he is past saving cannot be argued out of it. I learned that at my father's bedside, and I will not waste breath I might spend better. I will only be here in the morning when it breaks. Send me away if you like. Say all of that to me again if you like. I will be here." And she took up her basket of mending from the chair, and she made him her plain small curtsy, the same she had given his ruin on the gravel the first night, and she went out and left him alone in the dark morning room with the last light gone from the window, he had unshuttered at her hands. He stood a long time. Somewhere in the west wing a clock told the hour, and told it again, and he did not move. The tide he had dreaded 3 weeks was on him now, the eve of the day, and had come for the first time in 6 years. Into a house where someone else knew what the day was, and he had spent the last of his strength driving that someone off, and had not driven her off, and did not know whether the thing loosening in his frozen chest was terror, or something for which he had lost even the name. He put his ruined hand against the cold glass again where she had stood, and he bowed his head, and he let the darkness he had chosen close over him, and for the first time it did not feel like peace, and it did not feel like home, and he understood that she had spoiled even that for him, and that whatever the morning brought he would never again be able to call his solitude by the name he had called it for 6 years. The morning came the way he had always known it would come, without mercy and without hurry, grying the shutters he had not opened while the house still slept. Radcliffe had not gone to his bed. He had sat the night out in the cold morning room where she had left him, in the chair her hands had warmed, and he had watched the black window turn slate, and the slate turn the color of ash. And somewhere before the light he had stopped pretending he was keeping a vigil for the dead and admitted to himself that he was listening for a step in the passage. 6 years he had spent this night alone by iron choice, barring his door against every servant who might have knocked. And now that no one came she had said she would be there in the morning. Not before it he found the solitude he had defended like a fortress had turned, in a single night, into a plain and ordinary loneliness, and he did not know how to bear it, because he had never before been lonely for anyone. He had only been alone. The smell of smoke came at first light, as it always did, out of nothing, out of his own ruined mind, and his heart went to hammering, and the twisted hand curled against his knee, and he rode it as he had learned to ride it, teeth set, waiting for the false fire to burn itself down behind his eyes. And it did burn down sooner than it had any right to, because through it, cutting across the phantom reek, came the honest common smell of the house waking coffee somewhere below, a grate being raked. The small living sounds of a place where people rose and worked and did not lie down in their grief. She had done that. She had put a house back around him without his leave, unshuttering room after room. And the day that had for 6 years found him walled in a dead wing, with the smoke found him this morning in a room with a window, and the difference was so simple and so enormous that he put his scarred hand over his eyes and sat a while and could not have said, if a man had asked him whether he was master of Hallorow or the most beggared creature in the county. He heard her at last. Not before the light, as he had feared and hoped. She had meant exactly what she said and no more, and she came only when the day was fairly up, her step even and unhurried down the passage he had lit for her 3 weeks running without ever telling her why. She did not come in. He heard her stop outside the door and stand, and he knew she was giving him the choice of it, that she would not force herself upon a man on the one morning of the year he had a right to his own darkness. She would wait to be sent for or sent away. She had said so. She kept her word the way other people kept accounts. He rose. His body had gone stiff with the night and the cold, and he crossed to the door like an old man, and he opened it, and she was there in the grey passage with a shawl about her shoulders and no basket, no lamp, no small offered thing in her hands, this time only herself, come as she had promised, to stand in the water with him and ask for nothing. She looked up into his face, and whatever she read there she did not name. She only waited. You came, he said. His voice was a ruin. I said I would. I told you not to. You did. A faint gravity touched her mouth that was not quite a smile. You told me a great many things, your grace. I heard all of them. I weighed them through the night, as I dare say you did. And in the end I could not make any of them come to more than a frightened man's wish to be left to drown in peace. And I have never in my life been able to grant that particular wish. My father asked it of me too at the last. I did not grant it him either. She drew the shawl closer. I will go if you truly wish it, but you will have to wish it this morning out loud, looking at me, and not from behind a shut door with a settlement in your mouth. That was cheaply done last night, and we both know it. It was so exactly the thing no one had said to him in 6 years, not the pity, not the horror, not the practiced averting of the eyes, But a plain refusal to be lied to, that something gave way in him that had been holding since the roof came down. He did not answer her. He could not. He stepped back from the door instead, which was answer enough, and she understood it and came in, and the two of them stood in the ashen room where the window she had opened let in the grey, unhurried morning of the worst day of his year. "Sit with me," he said, when he could, "if you will." "I do not." He stopped. He had meant to say, "I do not think I can be alone with it," and the words were too large and too true to get past his teeth, and he let them go unsaid, and she heard them anyway. She always heard the ones he could not say. She drew the second chair to his without a word and sat, near enough that he felt the warmth of her again through the cold, and they said nothing for a long while. And it was the first hour of that day in 6 years that he had not spent clawing at a burning door in his mind. It was she who broke the silence, and she broke it gently, on the thing itself. How old would he be? She asked. This year. No one had ever asked him that. The county spoke of the fire, when it dared speak at all, as a catastrophe, a scandal, a reason to lower the voice, never as the loss of a particular small boy who would have had particular birthdays. Radcliffe heard the question and felt the frozen country in his chest crack straight across. 8, he said. He would be 8, he would be, and there it was, the thing 6 years of iron had held down, rising in him past all his holding, the whole unbearable arithmetic of a life that had not been let go on. He would be breeched and out of the nursery. He would have a pony by now. I had picked it, I had a grey pony picked out that I never, his voice went. He had not wept in 6 years. He wept now, without grace and without warning, his face in his ruined hand, his shoulders going like a man broken over an oar. 6 years of it coming up at once, because a portionless girl with no reason on earth to trouble herself had asked him how old his son would be. And she did not draw back from it, and she did not hush him, and she did not lay a smothering comfort over it to make it stop. She put her hand upon his arm the first time she had ever touched him, and she let it lie there, warm and steady and light, and she let him weep the whole of it out, and when at last it ebbed she was still there, and her hand was still on his arm, and the day had got no darker for his weeping. If anything, the grey at the window had thinned toward a pale and ordinary light. "There," she said softly when he had done, "you have carried him 6 years like a stone you were forbidden to set down. You are allowed to grieve him, Radcliffe. That is not the same as being guilty of him. A father is allowed to grieve his son." He lifted his head. His face was wet, and he did not trouble to hide it from her, which was itself a thing he had not done before a living soul since he was a boy. "You keep telling me what I am allowed," he said, and it came out not as the sneer he might once have made of it, but as something near to wonder, as though there were a court somewhere that had found for me, and only I had not heard the verdict. "There is no court. There is only what is true, and you have been the hanging judge of your own case for 6 years with no one to speak for the accused, and a man cannot try himself justly. He gives himself no counsel. He hears no witness but the worst one." She took her hand from his arm slowly, as though it cost her something, and folded it in her lap. "I have been in that dock, your grace. When my father died, I had nursed him 3 years, and I was sure to the marrow that I had done it wrong, given the draught too late one night, let a window stand open, missed the sign a wiser nurse would have caught. I tried myself, and I hanged myself 100 times over in the dark. And do you know what freed me? Not being told I was blameless. I did not believe that, and I never shall. It was one person, an old physician, a plain man, who looked at me and said, 'You loved him, and you did all a loving girl could do, and it was not enough. 'Cause sometimes love is not enough to hold a thing in the world, and that is the most terrible truth there is, and it is not your crime.' That is all. That is the whole of what he gave me, and it was everything." Radcliffe sat very still. The pale light moved on the floor between them. "You are giving it to me now," he said. "The same coin. I am trying to. You are a harder case than I was. You have more pride to work through, and a title to hide behind, and 6 years head start on the hanging. But yes, I am telling you what the old man told me. You loved him past all sense, and you went up a burning stair for him, and you held your own hand in the fire, and it was not enough, and that is the most terrible truth there is, and it is your grief unto your death, and it is not your crime." She held his eyes. "You did not let your son burn, Radcliffe. You could not reach him. Those are different things, and you have called them by the same name for 6 years, because the true name was more than you could live beside. It is not more than you can live beside. You have only never tried. He looked at her a long time in the grey room, and the thing that had frozen in him the night the roof came down, the thing that had kept its shape all these years precisely, because he had never once let the warmth near enough to threaten it, thawed at last, quietly, without breaking him. The way ground gives up its winter not in a crack, but in a slow softening you do not mark until you find the frost is gone. He understood, sitting there, exactly what he had done to her the night before, and exactly what she was, and the two understandings arrived together and left him no place to hide. He had told her the worst of himself to drive her off. She had heard the worst of himself and had not gone. And in the not going she had shown him the plain shape of what he had been too proud and too much a coward to look at, that he had spent 6 years mistaking his penance for his virtue, guarding his wound as though the guarding honoured the dead, when all the while the dead had asked nothing of him but to go on loving in a house that lived, and he had given them instead a boarded wing and a shuttered heart, and a good woman turned out of his door. "I have been unjust," he said. It came slowly, each word set down like a stone he was laying at last in its right place. "Not to Cordelia, not to the boy. I have grieved them justly enough, God knows. I have been unjust to you." He looked at his own ruined hand and then at her. "You came into this house as a debt paid by a woman who wished you gone. I have watched you these weeks unbar my windows one by one and pull the bindweed off my walls and set a lit lamp in my dark passages, wanting nothing, and last night, when I felt the whole frozen weight of me begin to shift toward you and could not stop it, I did the one cruel and cowardly thing left in me. I struck at your pride because it was all I could find to strike, and I called it decency, and I told myself I was saving you. I was not saving you. I was saving myself the terror of being seen and being stayed with, and I dressed it up as mercy, as I have dressed up everything I ever did that I was ashamed of. You named it exactly last night. I have not been able to unhear it since. Radcliffe, let me finish. I have never in my life said a true thing to a woman before it was too late to matter, and I will not begin the habit again today." He turned in the chair to face her fully, and he did not spare himself the light. "You said I could not be argued out of thinking myself past saving. You were right, you could not have, but you did the one thing that could. You stayed. You said you would be here in the morning, and you were here in the morning, and no one has kept a promise to me in 6 years, because I gave no one leave to make one. I gave you no leave either. You made it anyway." His voice was low and quite steady now, steadier than it had been all that terrible morning. "I do not know how to do this. I have unlearned it, if I ever knew it. But I would rather stand here unlearned and clumsy in front of you than spend one more year expert at being alone. That is the whole of what I have to say, and I have said it badly, and I mean every word of it more than I have meant anything since the roof came down." She had gone very still while he spoke, and now he saw that her eyes were bright, and that she was letting him see it, as he had let her see his own wet face and even trade honesty for honesty, which was the only coin that had ever passed true between them. "You have not said it badly," she said. "You have said it better than any man ever said anything to me, because I believe it, and I have been lied to prettily all my life and know the difference. A small unsteady breath, but I must be as honest as you have been, or it is worth nothing. I did not stay for your name, Radcliffe, nor your 10,000 a year, nor to be the Duchess of anywhere. I would have stayed if you had been the gardener you keep pretending your walls belong to. I want the man who held his hand in the fire. I have never wanted anything else in this house, and if you offer me the rank instead of the man, I will go back to Ellingham Court and thank you kindly and mean none of it. So be sure it is me you are asking to stay, and not merely someone who would witness your going on. Because I will not be a nurse to your grief. I will be a wife to your life, or I will be nothing here." He rose then out of the chair, and she rose with him, and they stood close in the pale-lit room on the morning that had been for 6 years the blackest of his calendar, and was, he understood with something like awe, no longer black at all. He lifted the ruined hand, the one he had held for years half-curled and hidden, the one he had never willingly shown a living soul, and he did not hide it now. He held it open between them where she could see the whole seamed and twisted truth of it. "This is the hand," he said. You know what it is and how it came to be. I have kept it from every eye in 6 years. He turned it, palm up, and offering a confession both. It is yours if you will have it, and the man it belongs to, who is clumsy and unlearned and past his best in asking anyway. Not the rank, not the going on. The man, I am sure. I have never in my life been so sure of anything, and I have wasted enough of both our lives being a coward about it. And Dulcie Fosgrove looked down at the ruined hand held open before her, and then up at his unguarded face, and she laid her own hand into it, warm and certain, closing her fingers over the scars he had spent 6 years ashamed to show, and the frozen country in his chest gave up the last of its winter, and he found, holding her hand in his broken one in the grey and thawing light, that he had at last set the stone down. They stood so a long while, her hand shut warm over the scars of his, and he did not once think to take it back. It was the strangest sensation left to him after a life spent guarding every approach, that a thing he had hidden as his shame was being held as his worth, and that the holding did not lessen it, or prettify it, or ask it to be other than it was. She knew exactly what the hand had cost. She held it the more firmly for knowing, and Radcliffe, who had schooled himself for 6 years to want nothing because wanting had once been answered with fire, found that he wanted this, her hand in his, her plain gaze on his wet face. The grey ordinary morning coming up around them wanted it so simply and so wholly that the old dread of wanting could find no purchase against it. "Then it is settled," he said, and heard the unfamiliar thing his own voice had become, not the flat command of the master of Harrow, nor the ruined whisper of the man who had wept, but something in between them, warm and a little unsteady, the voice of a man who had decided to live. "Though I will do it properly, if you will suffer me to. I have done everything else in my life the wrong way round, loved too late, spoken too late, wept 6 years late. I should like to do one thing in its right order before I die. I should like to ask you as a man asks, and be answered as a man is answered, and not have it wrung out of us both by a bad night and a worse morning. You have asked me already," she said, a smile coming up under the gravity at last, the first he had seen go all the way to her eyes. "I heard it plainly. I have answered you already. You cannot unask a thing merely to have the pleasure of asking it again in a cleaner coat. Can I not?" It was very nearly humour. He had forgotten he possessed the thing. "Then grant me the coat, at least. Grant me the county. I have hidden from every soul in this shire for 6 years, Dulcie, and let them make of me what monster they pleased, and let them pity you for being sent to me. I will not have you carried into this quietly, as a thing done in a shuttered house and never owned in the light. You were sent here in shame that was none of yours. I mean to have you claimed in a manner no tongue in 3 parishes can mistake." She looked at him a moment, and he watched her understand what he was proposing, and watched her weigh what it would cost him the ending, in a single public stroke, of the reclusion behind which he had sheltered his whole broken self. "You need not do that for my sake," she said. "I do not require the county's good opinion. I never had it to lose. I know you do not require it. That is precisely why I may safely give it you." He lifted her hand and looked at it, small and roughened with honest work, folded into his seamed one. "It is not for your sake alone. It is for mine. A man who means to go on living cannot go on living in a tomb, and I have kept house in a tomb for 6 years and called it grief. You have unbarred every window in it but the last one, and the last one is the door to the world, and I find I cannot the latch of it alone. Come out into the light with me, let them see. Let them see the whole of it, the hand, the house, the woman my neighbour's wife thought fit only to throw to the beast to spare her own." His mouth hardened, not against Dulcie but against the memory of that bargain. "Let them see what the beast has done with what he was thrown. He has gone down on his knee to it." And he did, stiff as he was from the cold night, ruined hand and whole. The Duke of Harrow lowered himself to one knee on the floor of the morning room she had opened to the day, and asked her in the old plain words, looking up into her face, and Dulcie Fosgrove, who had been given away like a debt and had walked into a dead house asking nothing, put both her hands to his lifted face and said yes to him in the light. And it was witnessed by no one but the pale morning, and was, he thought, the truest witnessed vow of his life. He did the rest exactly as he had said he would. Word went out of Harrow that had not gone out in 6 years, that the Duke would receive. He had the great shrouded rooms uncovered. The holland cloths dragged from the furniture in clouds of grey dust, the shutters of the state apartments thrown back one after another, until the house that had been a lantern gone dark stood blazing along its whole south front for the first time since the fire. The servants went about it half in terror and half in a joy they did not dare show him, and he saw both and forgave both. They had grieved the boy too, in their way, and had kept faith with a master who gave them nothing to keep faith with. He raised the wages of every soul who had stayed through the dark years. He had the boarded wing, the burned wing not reopened, for some doors are not meant to be walked through again, but he had a stone set into its wall, plain and good, with 2 names upon it and their dates, Cordelia and the boy, so that they should be mourned henceforth in the open air of a living house and not in the shut dark of a man's chest. Dulcie stood beside him when the mason set it, and held his hand while he read it, and neither of them spoke, and that was the whole of the ceremony, and it was enough. Then he turned his face toward Ellingham Court. He might have summoned them. A word would have brought Lady Ellingham to Harrow at a run, her skirts and her civilities flying, for the woman who had traded her stepdaughter to a monster to keep the monster off her own girl would crawl 3 miles on the gravel to be seen dining with a duke. He did not summon them. He went. He had the town coach brought out. No one living had seen the town coach. It had stood on blocks under sheets since the funeral, and he had it cleaned, and the horses matched, and Dulcie handed up into it in a travelling cloak of dove grey that he had ordered from the county town without her knowing. And he drove with her openly along the public road on a market morning, past the gawping carters and the women at their gates who had spoken of him for 6 years in the voice one keeps for the mad and the damned, and he let every one of them look their fill. Ellingham Court received them in a fluster it could not master. Lady Ellingham came out to the very sweep, all quivering welcome, having had 5 frantic minutes' warning, and behind her on the steps stood Honoria in her best morning gown got hastily on. Honoria Ellingham, for whose smooth white sake Dulcie had been given away, pretty and pale, and looking from the ducal coach to her stepsister's dove-grey cloak with a dawning, sinking comprehension that Radcliffe watched arrive on her face without any pleasure, and without any pity either. He had not come to punish them. He had learned that grey morning the difference between justice and cruelty dressed as justice, and he would not make that mistake twice in one lifetime. But he had come to make a thing plain, and he made it plain. Lady Ellingham, he said, when she had done fluttering him toward her drawing-room. He did not go toward her drawing-room. He stood in the hall with Dulcie's hand drawn through his arm, and he pitched his voice to carry, for the servants were on the stairs and Honoria at the door, and he wished to say it once, fully before witnesses, and never have to say it again. Some months ago you sent a young woman of your household to my house. You will recall the terms in which it was done. You believed you were sending her to a ruin, to a soured and dangerous man who would use her ill or frighten her, or at the least bury her alive in a dead place where no better offer would ever find her. You judged her worth so slight, and your own daughters so dear, that you thought the ruin a fair price to keep me from your door. I have not come to reproach you for it. I have come to tell you that you were wrong in every particular, and that I am the whole and only gainer of your mistake. Lady Ellingham's mouth worked. She had gone the colour of tallow. This lady, he went on, and he covered Dulcie's hand on his arm with his own scoured one in the open, before them all, has consented to become my wife, not my pensioner, not my nurse. My wife and Duchess of Hallorow and mistress of everything I have, which is a very great deal, and of everything I am, which she found in a worse case than you would credit, and has mended past my deserving. You sent away the one person in this county who could see. You will have 3 parishes to tell of it before the month is out, and I would not for the world deprive you of the telling. He inclined his head, courteous and cold and entirely without spite, which was somehow worse for her than any storming would have been. You did me the greatest service of my life, madam, and you meant me the greatest harm. I find I cannot even hate you for it. I am too much obliged. He turned then to Honoria, who had shrunk against the door-frame, and his manner changed, gentled, for the girl had done nothing but be preferred, which was no crime in a child. You need not look so, Miss Ellingham. I am not the tale your mother frighted you with, or if I was, I am no longer. You were spared a marriage you dreaded, and your sister has gained a life she chose. There is no one here the loser, but the person who thought a kind and clever woman could be spent like coin, and she is the loser only of her own good opinion of herself, which is a debt she must settle privately. He looked back at Lady Ellingham once more. Dulcie will come to you as a sister comes, when she comes at all, and you will receive her as a duchess is received, and we will none of us ever speak of the terms of her going again. That is the whole of what I require. Good morning. It was Dulcie who softened the leaving, as he had known she would. She went to Honoria on the step and kissed her, and said something low that brought the girl's frightened chin up, and pressed her stepmother's cold hand once, without triumph, which was a grace Radcliffe himself could not yet have managed and loved her the more for. She had no vengeance in her. She had never had. The woman who had wronged her stood diminished on her own steps, not because Dulcie had struck her down, but because Dulcie, raised up, had simply revealed by contrast how small the striking down had been. That was the only justice the day dealt, and it was complete, and they drove home to Harrow through the market crowds in the open coach with the whole shire already beginning to talk, and Ratcliffe found he did not mind the talk at all. Let them talk. For 6 years they had talked of a monster in a shuttered house. Now they would talk of a duke who had come out into the light with a plain grey woman on his arm, and looked, of all the impossible things, happy. He would give them that to chew. It was truer than the monster had ever been. They were married in the parish church at Harrow, with the shutters of the great house behind them all thrown wide and every servant in the pews and half the gaping county besides, on a morning in the late gold of the year. He wore no glove upon the ruined hand. He had done with hiding it. When the moment came and the ring must be given, he gave it with that hand, the seamed and twisted fingers steady, and slid the plain gold band upon her finger before God and the shire, and did not care who saw the scars do it. She had told him once that the hand was the truest thing about him, being the mark of the one moment he had loved past his own safety, and he had come to believe her, and to wear it as she saw it, not as a shame survived, but as a vow already kept once in fire, and now to be kept again in gentler weather. She took the hand in both of hers when the words were done, there at the altar, and pressed her lips to the very worst of the scarring, before them all, and a sound went round the church that was half a gasp, and half something warmer. And Radcliffe of Harrow stood in the light of his own opened house, and was not ashamed of a single thing about himself for the first time since the roof came down. The years were good to them, and he had not known how to expect that, having no practice in good years. The house filled. It filled slowly at first, and then all at once, the way a spring comes guests where there had been no guests, music in rooms that had stood silent, the long table laid for company, and Dulcie at the foot of it turning aside the county's curiosity into ease. He learned to sit at his own board and let himself be looked at. He learned that a man may grieve a dead child and delight in a living house in the very same day, and that the delight does no dishonour to the grief. She had taught him that on the worst morning, and life taught it him over again, kindlier, 1,000 times. The very neighbours who had crossed the road to avoid his gate came now to his fires and went away disarmed, having found no monster to justify their long unkindness, only a grave, courteous man who watched his wife across a candlelit room, as though she were the light itself, and who laughed. When she teased him, a rusty unpractised laugh that grew easier with the using. Old obligations he had let lapse in his darkness he took up again, the tenants' roofs mended, the school at the crossroads endowed, the poor of the parish no longer left to a steward's cold accounting, but seen to by a duchess who had known herself what it was to be counted of no worth. Harrow, that had been a byword for a house shut against the world, became within a few short years a byword for the opposite, and Radcliffe, who had once measured his safety by the number of doors between himself and any living soul, could not now recall why he had ever thought a bolted door a comfort. And there came a morning, he was near 50 then and greyer, and the shire had long since forgotten it had ever called him anything, but fortunate when he stood at a paddock rail in the mild early light, and watched a small dark-haired girl of his own, sturdy and fearless and shrieking with joy, being led round and round on a fat grey pony by a groom who could not keep from grinning. He had bought the pony himself. He had gone to choose it, and had stood a long while in the dealer's yard with his hand on a grey neck, remembering another grey pony chosen and never given, and had wept a little, quietly, in the way that no longer frightened him, because it no longer had the power to freeze. and then he had bought it and brought it home. Dulcie came to the rail and stood beside him and put her arm through his, and they watched their daughter ride, and he did not need to tell her what the greyness of the pony meant, because she had been there for the whole of it, from the burning door to this. "You are thinking of him," she said. It was not a question, and there was no sorrow in it, only the old plain knowing that had saved his life. "I am always thinking of him," Radcliffe said. "I have found there is room. Did not used to believe there was room in a man for the dead and the living both, and that he must give the whole of himself to the one and rob the other. I believe now there is room. You made the room. You unbarred that window too." She leaned her head against his arm. Their daughter came round again and called out to them both to look. Look, she was going faster now, and he lifted the ruined hand open, unhidden. The hand of a man who had held it in the fire for love, and had no cause since to hide what love had cost, and he waved it wide over the paddock rail, so that the child should see her father's whole self plainly, and never once learn to be afraid of it. And the girl waved back and shrieked her delight, and the grey pony trotted on in the gold morning, and Dulcie's hand tightened warm in his, and the once guarded Duke of Helero, who had been given a woman as a debt, and had thought himself all saving, stood in the risen light of his living house with the wife no one else had troubled to see, and knew himself, at the last and for the rest of his days, entirely and unshamefully and forever seen.